Heyo everyone and welcome. I'm your friend Art of Mana, and today I just want to share some thoughts with you extemporaneously about why I'm excited regarding Metroid Dread. Okay, that's the big reveal for Nintendo. As far as I'm concerned, that was what sealed the deal and made E3 2021 so memorable for me. And memory is actually exactly the theme I want to talk about today. In fact, let me go back to just earlier when I was at lunch at work, and this is just a little shout out for one of my work friends. We were having lunch together, and I was actually sharing with her the 6-minute video I made of just the announcements from Nintendo. And when we got to the Danganronpa, I think that's how you say it, game, oddly enough, her first reaction was, "Oh wow, that's so exciting." And I went, "What?" I hadn't even heard what this was. I didn't even know what this was, right? I didn't know what this game was that she was showing me. And it turns out that her and her daughter actually bonded over the anime that game series is based on. Lo and behold, someone else knew what this was all about and was excited for this and thought this would be a great way for me to game and bond with my daughter a little bit more, which I thought was really cool. And it all came back to a memory. It all came back to a shared experience from the past. So that got me thinking, well, why am I so excited about Metroid Dread? A game which, by the way, my friend was a little bit, ho-hum about when she saw it. Now, for me, it comes back to my first experience with the game you see behind me, okay? This is Super Metroid, of course. Metroid 3, as you saw behind me. Super Metroid was my first experience with the Metroid franchise, and it was after my family and I had moved to a new home. We were a little bit out of city limits and in a fairly rural area, and we had this small corner store-like place. It was really more like an old-fashioned hitching post, or some place where you'd go and stock up on supplies, right? Old West style. It was even, I believe, if I remember correctly, almost log cabin-esque. It was kind of a fun little place. Anyway, they had one wall in the corner dedicated to video game rentals, and they had the boxes of various video games put in these little plastic cases, and one of those games was Super Metroid. Incidentally, another one was Star Fox, and it was through the same place where I first encountered Star Fox. Anyway, you took the box in its little plastic case up to the counter, and then they would give you the game cartridge, and of course you had to sign your life away, and you take that home and promise to return it and all of that. So that was the first time I had ever even held or seen Super Metroid, but they didn't have a whole bunch of selection to choose from, and it looked interesting. When I got home, I was blown away by the atmosphere and just the style that was oozing from this game. And I remember so vividly that first difficult, scary encounter when you're going through the spaceship and you're all alone and you're just wondering, what do I do? And you just keep progressing down and forward until finally you encounter Ridley, this enormous space pirate bat, this winged creature that starts attacking you mercilessly, and you are almost certain that you are about to perish. When finally Ripley just gives up and takes the small canister that he was holding and flies away, leaving you to escape a self-destructing space station. Oh my goodness. The blood and heart rate started increasing. The blood's pumping. I was so scared. And I'm thinking to myself, is this how it ends? And I'm starting to run back, and I'm seeing this timer counting down. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, where to next? How do I get through these rooms? Suddenly, things are flying from the ceiling and from the walls. There's sprays of hot steam, and I'm getting hit and hurt. And then I finally make my way all the way up this long chamber that took me so long to descend, and off I am to safety. And that moment, that clinched it for me. I was so hooked on this game. I'm kind of a fantasy and science fiction person, really more space fantasy than science fiction. I like big epic stories that are in these types of trappings, the fantasy tropes. And for me, one of the best aspects of the Metroid franchise is just how much it has this incredible atmosphere and this really incredibly powerful story of the big bad space warrior who has to contend with her conscience, who has to consider that she's here possibly eradicating an entire species. I mean, the game franchise never shied away from these really deep themes. And for a Nintendo game, that's pretty odd. I mean, Nintendo is fairly well known for light games, games that they might have really good stories, but they're not going to necessarily force you to think too much. No. Metroid went there. It wasn't afraid of it. Okay. That's just something that I later came to realize. But going back to those first moments with Metroid, my goodness, it was fun and I was hooked. And I remember spending my entire week with that game while it was rented, playing as much as I could and much as I could. And I didn't beat it. This was before I had a player's guide or anything like that. But I got pretty darn far. And oh boy, was it fun to unlock new power-ups and weapons, etc. Later on, my cousin came over and saw me playing that as I was about to return it and thought, this looks incredible too. He had the same reaction I did. And he ended up buying it. He was a little bit older than me. And so he was able to afford getting it. And so then I would watch him play and also borrow the game later on and finally beat it. Years later, this was close to the GameCube era, he was getting rid of all of his Super Nintendo games. And at this point in time, I had a little bit more money in my possession, and I offered to buy all of his Super Nintendo collection from him, thinking it would be a really shame if he were just to get rid of them all. And so many of the games that he had were games I remember playing with him and would love to play into the future. Thankfully, I ended up buying most of his collection, and he may have sort of unwittingly cut me a deal, as I don't think I ever fully paid him everything I owed him or said I would. He was okay with it. But, shh, between us. Long story short, I was really excited when the day came that he brought over the games, but there was one game missing, and it really shocked me, and it was Super Metroid. And I asked him about it, and he told me that one of my friends, whose older brother was his friend, sorry, let me rephrase that. One of my friend's older brothers, who was friends with my cousin, bought just that game, thinking it was so good. And I think it was for a pretty decent price. At the time, I think it might have been $25, and I think I had given something like $40 and maybe promised $60 for like the entire game collection. Okay, so he was definitely giving me a family discount. And I understood why he was selling that game for $25 to his friend. I didn't have Super Metroid. It wasn't in my collection. And I remember thinking as I was playing through some of these games that summer, man, I really want to go back and play Super Metroid. And Super Metroid then ended up being on my list of games to get eventually when I could. Now, as time went on and I became less interested in video games and actually set video games aside for a while after realizing that I had just been playing way too many of them, and I was going into college, I ended up still occasionally thinking about Metroid because it just stuck in my brain. But again, I wasn't really too committed to getting the game. But it did strike me that in Smash Brothers, there was Samus, and later on, Metroid Prime was a thing. And I remember seeing some videos about it. I never played it, but I thought, oh, that's cool. It's a really neat series. Didn't play games. Finally, got back into video games with the 3DS and, the DS, the original DS. I had a DS Lite, and the Wii. And when that happened, one of the first games on the virtual console I got was Super Metroid. Oh, I'm so excited to have it again. But I still wanted the physical copy. I still wanted my own cartridge. And I remember that, maybe a few years after that, when I had been reunited with my original collection of video game consoles and games that were stored at my parents', I took the time to seek out an original copy of Super Metroid. And it was through a couple of means that I looked for this. I looked on eBay, of course. I also looked at a local store that had a bunch of retro things, toys, and video games. It was a neat little shop, which incidentally I sold most of my Star Wars collection to. Run by a very neat gentleman, this was up in Washington, who really cared about giving people fair prices and pairing these old retro collectibles with people who would appreciate them and care for them. Really neat. His whole store was almost like a bedroom full of fun things. It would have been like the cool place to hang out as a kid. And everything was for sale. I looked there, and I saw a game, and I actually ended up picking up that game. And so I was very excited. I think it was about $80 at the time that I paid for it, because the game did rise and rise in price. And I think part of it was because games done quick was a thing, and the Super Metroid race was becoming more and more popular, and there weren't that many places to purchase this game. It still was not super common in a lot of the platforms and things like that. So I was willing to pay it. I had seen those races also, and my excitement for playing through Super Metroid on original hardware was intensifying. Then maybe a few months later, there was someone who had put out an ad on Craigslist about getting rid of their collection of video games, mostly Super Nintendo games. And they were explaining that they were falling upon hard times, didn't have the money to be able to get pay their rent, and needed to part with a lot of their beloved collection. I reached out to the person, explained that I was a collector, explained that I probably couldn't buy everything there, but that I would be willing to give a fair price for some of the things that I really wanted and didn't have. She agreed. We met. We went through her collection. And one of the things that she explained was that there were certain games that she just sort of wanted to have good homes for. And she was willing to sort of bundle them for even a better price, as long as it was going to a good home. And she felt that I was a good home. Super Metroid was one of those games. She said that she loved it growing up and explained stories almost very similar to mine. And it was a mixture of that exploration and the atmosphere of the game, as well as the excitement and the deep storyline that really appealed to her. And so letting it go was not easy. But she was happy it was going with someone who appreciated the game. And so I ended up with my second copy of Metroid. And funny enough, I still have 2 copies of Super Metroid. I couldn't get rid of it. Now, over time, I've collected various other games in the Metroid franchise. I actually first started with a little antique store find, secondhand store find of the original Metroid game, which still to this day is so complicated and confusing. Later on, I actually got copies of Metroid 2, and I do have the Prime Trilogy on the disc set for the Wii. And over time, I have played most of the Metroid games, but not all, believe it or not. I still will come back to Super Metroid because it just is such a big part of my growing up with video games. And looking at some of the more mature themes in games, those still very approachable, not over the top, not excessive, just deep. So when I saw Metroid 5 splash across the screen, I was so excited because that means that this Metroid game is a continuation of the very franchise I love and the storyline that I love. Now, I admit I haven't played Metroid 4 yet. but I do intend to. Don't worry, I do intend to. In any event, I'm going to have to track that down here soon. I did play the remake of Metroid 2, and the team that made that game did such a good job. That was one of the few games of the last generation with the 3DS that I played while as a streamer on my own to completion and sunk a lot of hours in just for my own enjoyment. It was so good and so much fun, and I remember asking in my head and maybe in a couple of streams, Nintendo, do you think by any chance you could just put together a game with the same engine from the same team, a unique one, a new entry into the Metroid franchise? That would be super cool. Just slap that on the Switch for me, please. So when the reveal came, and that's exactly what Nintendo did, I was blown away. This is what I had been hoping for and what I had really wanted. And in the back of my mind, I did recall that Metroid Dread has been something Nintendo's talked about for a while. This isn't something that just came out of the blue. This is a long anticipated game of sorts. It just blew my socks off. If you don't know much about Metroid, hey, that's fine. There are a lot of series and franchises that Nintendo has, and not all of them appeal to me. Not all of them appeal to everyone. Metroid is one that appeals to me, and I hope that if nothing else, this gave you some pause to consider why this is so exciting and why Metroid Dread's announcement just stole E3 for me and for so many other people. It's a special franchise for a lot of us, and for me included. I hope that you've taken away some wonderful moments and memories from this year's E3, and I hope that there are some great games that you're anticipating in the year and years ahead. Happy gaming, do good, be well, stay safe and healthy, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.